This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. G'day, I'm Kate Watson. Alice Springs comes and goes from the national news coverage, particularly over the last few years. There was the lapse of the alcohol and pornography bans in remote communities around Alice Springs in mid-2022, and from there we saw things like property offences increase by almost 60%, assaults increased by 38%, and domestic violence assaults double. Since that time, steps have been taken to reinstate alcohol restrictions and much has been done to address the problems. But even so, the town and its surrounding communities have been in the national spotlight, not only as a focus for the national debate around the voice, but for spikes in crime, particularly youth crime, for poor school retention, for continuing alarming rates of domestic violence. Earlier this year, there was what's been called a riot on one of the pubs in town. It's seen curfews put in place, funding announcements, and increased police presence. So as we were reflecting on the year that was, it seems an important news story to revisit. We ummed and ahed on who to speak with, and all roads kept pointing back to Matt Paterson, the young, outspoken mayor who landed himself in the job by just 2 votes back in 2021. So I start this chat by asking him why do it, why put your hand up for mayor, and then we get into the issues in Alice Springs, the reality of trying to solve them, the wider implications, his take on Australia and whether we're a racist country, and of course the counterpoint, which is all the reasons why Matt says, despite everything, Alice Springs is an amazing place. Matt, you grew up in Alice Springs. You're raising your family in Alice Springs. What do you love about Alice Springs?
It is an incredible place and it has so much opportunity here. And I mean, take me for example, I was 26 when I was elected on to council, and then 4 years later I was 30 years old, elected as mayor. You know, all of my mates that I went to school with are here in Alice Springs, you know, working for themselves. They've got their own business. My wife's started a business here. So it really is the land of opportunity, and you know, the community spirit here in Alice Springs is something that, you know, I love, and it's what's kept me here for 30 odd years. And, you know, I think it's what keeps people coming back and what keeps people staying in Alice Springs. So, you know, whenever something happens, whenever there's a crisis or someone hurts themselves or whatever it is, the town really rallies together and, you know, we all get behind one another. And, yeah, it's really what we're a big country town, and it's what the fabric of Alice Springs is.
I have a number of Squiz listeners who I spoke to ahead of this who said exactly the same thing. So a shout out to them, and there's certainly consensus amongst those from Alice that listen to this podcast in particular. What do you, and I mean, just before we get into the issues, because obviously these are all the, you know, I want to talk to you about the positive parts of Alice Springs, but we are here to talk about the reason why Alice Springs is in the news so much, and that is the issues. But I kind of thought, should I ask you this at the end or should I ask you this at the start? And I think I'll ask you at the start. Like, what do you wish people understood about Alice that you feel is maybe perhaps misunderstood?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question. Alice Springs is an amazing place, and like everywhere, we have our challenges, right? It is like everywhere, but what happens here, we need to talk about as a country because it is in your face, but also there is times when it is the most amazing place in Australia, and when people are in the CBD for events, or, you know, we had a few thousand competitors here for the Masters Games, that's the positive things out of Alice Springs, and that's what we need to get people out there. Say, hey, yeah, we do have our problems and we're in a bit of a bubble here. Not saying that the problems don't exist, they certainly do exist, but also we actually need you to come here to help business, to help tourism. Otherwise, these problems are going to grow and grow and grow, and more businesses are going to shut their doors. So we need people from around the country, especially, to come into Alice Springs. And, you know, we do see that over, you know, that April to October period is our tourism season. So I'm sure people, when they hear this, they might want to come for, you know, some special events next year, such as Parchima and Fink and those sort of things.
I'm actually going to ask you at the end, what is the number one event you would recommend to people listening? And so please park that and have a think about it while we chat. But I do want to ask you about, you know, you, I guess, as you sort of said, you became deputy mayor very young. You joined council very young, became mayor at the age of 30. Why? Why do it?
You know, I ask myself that question every day now. When I was growing up, I was always captain of the footy team or the rugby team. I was president of the cricket club at a very young age. And timing's everything, right? And so we had Q&A here one year, and I asked the question, and I think it was Virginia Trioli said, "Oh, that's the question of the night," because I got a big standing ovation. And the question was just about airfares. And,
Yeah.
it was, and it still is to this day, more expensive. My wife and I going on our honeymoon, it was more expensive to go from Alice Springs to Adelaide return than it was from Adelaide to Croatia return. And people are like, well, this is, a real issue. I'm walking out and the council elections were 12 weeks away, I think, and lots of people said, I'd already been tapped on the shoulder and didn't really think about it. And I said, well, maybe, strike while the iron's hot, and put my hand up. And there was not many young people on the ballot list. I mean, in 2017, when I first ran, I was the youngest person on the ballot out of all the councillors and mayoral candidates. And then in 2021, I was still the youngest. And so, I want to be able to get young people into politics, because the way I view it is I want to be here to make changes for the next generation, including my kids and, other young people. And that was sort of the main driver of just how can I help increase livability here? And I think you can do that being inside the room rather than just throwing stones from outside of the room. And look, it was pretty tough. I mean, I take my hat off to anyone who's willing to put themselves out there, because it's pretty full on, but it was a great experience. And luckily enough, I was elected. And then in 2021, I said I wasn't going to run for mayor, and my wife had just started her business. And then really late in the piece, I said, "Oh, sorry, Caitlin, I'm going to run." And she wasn't real happy with me, but I think she's moved on. And then, it was just about how I can help increase livability in the community and build some infrastructure, especially for young families. The average age of Alice Springs, right, in the latest census, the average age of Alice is 34. So we're quite a young community, and so we need some infrastructure for young families as well. And that was it, and that's how I got into it.
You say she's moved on, not moved on from you. You are still married.
Yeah. Yes.
Just checking.
Yeah, we are still married. Just moved on from the fact that I ran for mayor. And
just turning our attention, I guess, to the national news, and which is obviously what we cover at the Squiz. What does it feel like for you? And I know you can't speak but on behalf of everyone in Alice Springs, but the national attention is nearly always negative. What is that experience like for a town like Alice Springs?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough, isn't it? Like, there's a balance, right? There's certainly a balance around the message that gets out there. And I don't mind media reporting on it if it's fair and just, but I also don't think that we need to be the pin-up, town or city as such for whatever the agenda is for politicians or media or whomever it may be. So I certainly think it's a balancing act. Now, what we were going through last year and the last few years has been, it's pretty confronting. And to put that in perspective, that's happening in Alice Springs all day, every day. I mean, in the heart of the country, I think the rest of the country actually needs to be made aware of what is happening here. And whilst it's not pretty, it is important to know. But as I said, it is a balance. But what we need to do is to make sure that while we're saying we've got our challenges, it is a balance of saying it is an amazing place, and, don't do this or don't do that, but come to Alice Springs and experience what you want to experience. And, there's the cultural aspect, there's a lot of things that you can get in Alice Springs that you can't get anywhere else. And, that's what we need to start promoting. And whilst Australia seen it as being quite shocked, it can be fixed, and we will be the comeback kid, and then everyone will be going, wow, Alice Springs is an amazing place.
I was interested in obviously we're already talking about youth crime as one of the big problems and the big problems that we've seen looking from the outside in. When this flared up again at the start of the year, and I'll repeat a quote back to you, and who knows, you might have changed your mind on this, but I think it was in the NT News at around March. You said there's been years and years of social policy on the run, dumb decision after dumb decision, the community's fed up. Is there any examples of those dumb decisions that you reference that you can give?
Did I say that?
I think so. Believe so.
It sounds like something I would say. I still agree with it, by the way, if I did say that. Whoever said it, it's a very good quote.
Well, unless the NT News is wrong, but...
well, that wouldn't be the first time they've misquoted me, but I think I do remember saying that.
Yeah, I think that the premise of the article was that you appeared really frustrated. And I just think it's just interesting just to explore where that frustration came from and what some of those examples might be for people.
Yeah, so one of them was the lapsing of the Stronger Futures legislation, and for people who might not know what that is, it was a revamped intervention. So the intervention went from 2007, 2012, and then Stronger Futures went from 2012 to 2022. What that involved is no pornography and remote communities. They are effectively restricted zones for alcohol. So if you lived in these restricted areas, you couldn't purchase alcohol. And the way that that was captured is we have to scan our licence. So we have two sort of ports at the police, at the bottle shops. One of them, we have a police at the front door where you show your licence, and they can ask you where you're going to drink it, who's you're going to drink with. And then the second point is you actually scan your licence when you purchase it, and that would show up whether you're on the banned drinkers register. Now, to get on the banned drinkers register, it's usually, you can self-put on there, but also if you commit a crime under the influence of alcohol, you'll be put on there. Now, we had that for 10 years. Then overnight, it just lapsed, and we had 10 years to plan for it. Nothing was in there. And then what we seen was absolute carnage in our town. I think the politicians actually forget sometimes why they're there. They were playing politics with it. Ultimately, it was the best option because it was there in the first place, because it was to help with domestic violence. It was to help provide people with opportunities to actually buy groceries rather than alcohol. That was one of the decisions that I would consider one of the dumbest decisions, to let that lapse for Alice Springs. And as I said, this is 30 years of social policy on the run that's got us to this place. A lot of these children are referred to by many members of the public and, broad public as baby bonus children. They're in that generation where the stimulus was, well, we're going to give everyone $5,000 for having a baby. And now we've got a generation of $5,000 baby bonus kids that unfortunately haven't been brought up in a world where, they had the loving and caring homes like, most other people are lucky enough to have.
It's an interesting point about the generational thing, like I'm trying to figure out the way to ask this question, but I guess if it is generationally embedded, is it intractable, these issues?
We just need to make those changes now for the next generation of kids, so this isn't a continuation. And, having 30, 40, 50 kids walking around at 2 o'clock in the morning, ranging from the ages of 4 or 5 to 13 together. I mean, if that was happening, if they were blonde hair and blue-eyed in Perth or Sydney or Melbourne, would we be approaching it differently? And then because they're Indigenous kids, well, we still need to wrap Indigenous kids up in cotton wool and say, as a society, this is not okay, and we want you to be, a part of our community. It's not us versus you. We're all in this together. So what help do you guys need for us as a community to help you? And I don't know if, there's enough services here. I think there's 34 youth services here. So how do we still have these big group of kids here living in overcrowded houses? Or what's the part of this as a community or society or a country that we're too embarrassed to talk about? Like, we need to be grown-ups about it. Otherwise, it's going to continue on.
When you hear 30, 40 kids on the street, 30, 40, like, why is it? And then you hear people say, well, they're safer there, then they don't want to go home. Like, what is happening at home? And I think we all sort of know that the broad strokes. But I think it'd be interesting to hear from you, like, why don't they want to go home?
Yeah, you nailed it. It's safer for these kids to be on the street, unfortunately, because of the horrendous amount of domestic violence that we see, the overcrowding. Some of the state that these poor people live in. It blows your mind, and I think that alcohol is a real issue, and we need to be better as a community in managing that, noting that it's a legal product. Like, you should be able to have a beer after work, but if you can't do so responsibly, then you shouldn't be able to. And I just think a lot of it is what is normal to these kids. This is just normal, and I think living in Alice Springs, you become a lot, desensitised to a lot of issues that you don't see elsewhere, and I think that's a problem in itself. But yeah, ultimately there is a huge amount of overcrowding, as I've mentioned a few times here today, and the domestic violence and the rate of domestic violence is just, it's staggering. And our prisons are full. They're using their watch houses, the police watch houses, as prisons at the moment because there's nowhere to put anyone. So, I'm glad I'm not in Darwin trying to see how to figure it all out, but it certainly needs to be, all addressed all at once.
I guess that's probably a good time to throw another quote back at you. It was in reference to you calling for an audit of social services, but you said, I don't think that's actual rocket science to have an audit. If you're paid to deliver a service for youth and there's 100 youth on the street, well, someone's not delivering. I come from a construction background. If you're paying for a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house and you get a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, well, you don't get paid. Is that what you're referring to there? It's just some services just aren't delivering, and how do we actually assess that?
Yeah, that's one of my favourite quotes, because it's so straightforward, isn't it? It makes so much sense that, there are so many social services here, and the problem is it's not all down to them. So there's 34 services here. That means you're paying 34 general managers, 34 receptionists, 34 rent bills, 34, I could go on, right? But all of a sudden, all they can get is 1 or 2 years of funding, and then the contract stops. Then they've got to rebid. And it's really sort of this, they're all up against each other, where they sort of can't work together because the system doesn't allow them to work together. So you need to go back to the drawing board and say, well, what do we want to achieve here? This is where we are now, this is where we want to get to, and what services have we got? I'm telling you right now, we don't need 34, because there's, as I said, some of them are doing well. Some of them are just there to get their paycheck and move on. Which is sad, because it means that we're failing kids. And if government keep throwing money at them because they're scared of the pushback, well, then they're going to fail as well.
We've just passed 1 year since the failed Voice referendum. How was that result for Alice Springs, I guess, firstly?
Well, Alice Springs voted no to it. And, it's interesting about the Voice, because that's when Alice Springs was in the media, and we were in the media from January until October. Just about every other day we're on the front page, and Alice Springs was really the pin-up boy for the right side of media, saying, no, is this going to fix Alice Springs? And X, Y, Z, and they're entitled to their opinion. But look, we are probably underrepresented in Alice Springs, but we're probably overgoverned, quite frankly. And so, I can completely understand about having a voice and what it was there to achieve. But was it another level of bureaucracy for the Bush to jump through to get things delivered on? And so, would have it sped up that process, or would have it slowed down? That was the questions that were getting asked in Alice Springs, and that was a question getting asked from a lot of surrounding Indigenous communities as well. That's something that I heard.
So I guess my question for you then is, a lot of the commentary continues now that part of the reason for that no vote was that Australia is a racist country. And I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but again, for outsiders looking in, it's interesting to get your take. Like, do you think Australia is a racist country?
No, I don't. And I think that if the Prime Minister had to split the vote up into two parts, I honestly believe they both would have got up, because it would have, if the constitutional recognition part, I think that everyone wants that. They just weren't sure where the second part was. And I think that's, I think that was probably an error on his part. But, and I think a lot of Australians, I think the statistics were 98% of Australians would have voted for that. So I don't know how then on the flip side we can say Australia are racist. Just like anything, we're all entitled to a vote. It's democracy. I'd probably think that they didn't get their messaging right around what they wanted to really sell it as, and people had too many questions going into the voting booth. And, I get that question as well. Is Alice Springs racist? Well, absolutely not. People are fed up with what's going on, whether you're black, white or brindle. We just want some answers. And, we have a community where you're playing footy with people from all across the countryside, or you're playing netball with them, or you're working with them. It's not racist. It's just we love each other here, but we just want to get better as a community, and we just want to have some of the answers. And I think it's easy to say we're racist because I'm saying, well, would you leave 50 white girls who are 4 to 12 with blonde hair and blue eyes, would you let them walk around the street in Sydney? The answer is no. Well, then why are you going to leave 50 Indigenous kids from 4 to 12 walk around in Alice Springs? And no one can answer that, or no one wants to.
What is the question different? Is Australia racist to have you seen racism occur? Those are two very different questions.
Yes, they are different questions, absolutely. And are some people racist? Well, I don't know. You do see some things on social media. Do you go, well, I don't agree with that, and that's, poor form, and is it racist? Probably is racist. But, I'll stick up for Alice Springs here, and I'll say that Alice Springs is not a racist community. It is a beautiful, cohesive community, and we're very multicultural, and we have people from all walks of life here.
Matt, there's been a new territory government elected this year. One of their big platforms was addressing this issue of crime. Governments come and go, but do you see any renewed hope with this change of government?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and the government have just announced a range of packages in Alice Springs, and so that's pretty exciting, and I think that'll help future generations around the infrastructure that's going to be built. I think there has to be a change regarding the law and order. I don't think there's two ways about it. Noting they'll get some things wrong, and I think that's okay. And I'm not going to be critical of someone doing something and getting it wrong rather than doing nothing at all. And, when we go back to the Stronger Futures, they did nothing. They knew that it was going to be a recipe for disaster. They just weren't willing to make a brave decision. So if they do something and it doesn't work, well, let's try it again. But doing nothing's certainly not working at the moment.
I think the theme of, a lot of what I'm reading and a lot of what you're saying is actually that all of these issues, this story of Alice Springs is about so much more than the social issues. It's actually the economic issues. Can you speak to that a little bit so people get an understanding of how you go from, massive social issues right through to actually, how do you hire people? How do you attract people to the town?
Yeah, it's such a good question and a hard one to answer. It's about, we've tried to promote people who have come to live here and get them to tell their story. It's not for me, because I've lived here all my life. So we're promoting the people that have come and made Alice Springs their home. And it's been quite difficult to recruit through a lot of things. This was all on the back end of COVID, and a lot of people were leaving regional centres to go back to be with their elderly parents or their family that they haven't seen for a long time. To put things in perspective around the economy, we were 30% down last year on the tourism the year before, and then we're another 30% down on last year. So it has been quite
That's
difficult.
very significant, yeah.
Yeah, and especially because we are a tourism, tourism town. And so we've sort of sit in between being a service hub on one hand and a tourism destination on the other. And the needle's getting closer and closer to being a service hub. Well, we just need to pick it back up and get it at least in the middle where it's tourism and service. We'll always be a service hub because of where we're located, but we can still promote that tourism. And I know TCA, the Tourism Central Australia, doing a lot of work with government. Just recently there was an announcement for a new tourism information centre here in Alice Springs. So that's obviously part of the package, and a new National Aboriginal Art Gallery that's going to go down here, which is, a couple of $100 million. So there are things on the horizon, but we just need to get there and make sure that we can support business while, these changes are coming.
So I assume
it's so hard to get people to want to be here. But, as I've said, if you're a builder, there is building works for days. There's health assured building. Like, there's something for everyone to do. If you're in Alice Springs and you don't have a job, it's because you don't want one.
Yeah, and as you speak, I'm thinking, people listening, they might want to help. I guess this what you're saying is the best thing they can do is consider moving to Alice Springs. That might be a stretch, but a trip would be a good start. What should they put in their calendar?
Well, it really depends on what you're into, right? So we'll start at the easy things. We have an AFL game once a year where you can drive down. You can do that. We have the Fink Desert Race, which is, Australia's most amazing dirt bike race. And that's incredible. It's a couple of days of camping. You get the motorbikes, the buggies, huge. People from all over the world come to it. Massive event. If you're not into the sporting environment, then you've got to come for Parchima. Parchima is a light show once a year. It goes for 10 days over Easter. It was actually an event that was built up for, the rich city folk to come to Alice Springs. But what they've found with all the bookings is that it's actually young families.
Right.
And a lot of families will, they're taking their year off in their caravan, they're travelling around the country. They're the ones that are coming through the gate, and it happens at the Desert Park. It is one of the most amazing things you'll see. We light up the ranges. It's a absolutely very special event. They're just three. Could keep going. There's lots to do. If you get on and have a look online, there'll be something for you. But also, if you don't want to come for an event, come and just see the countryside. There's some gorges. There's an amazing walk. Some of the best mountain bike tracks in the world as well. Simpsons Gap, Ellery Gap. They're all incredible places. Rainbow Valley, Palm Valley. I could keep going, but they're the places you need to get out and have a look at. And come to Alice Springs, because you certainly won't regret it.
Is it safe?
Yes, it is safe. You just, say what I would say to someone in Melbourne is don't walk in dark areas at 2:00 in the morning. Unfortunately, crime does happen, and we know as a community it's not going to go from here to 0% of crime. I think people are okay with that. It's just the level of the crime and what is happening. But when you're here, of course, just be smart as you would be anywhere else.
Are the flights any cheaper since your Q&A appearance?
No, they're not. It's so frustrating. We had Bonza, and we were quite lucky with that when it was here. But then obviously, what happened to Bonza that affects us. A lot of families will now go to Ayers Rock and bypass Alice Springs, and in the good old days, they'd come here and they'd have to come here first. And I know that's an ongoing conversation around how to get more people here, but no, it is extremely expensive to get out, especially for Christmas and school holidays. But more importantly, if something was to happen quickly and you needed to get away to see a loved one, it's quite demanding. And that's that livability part that I talk about. That does make it challenging, but we will continue to work with who we need to work with to make sure that we can, help out where we can.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
All good. Thank you. Thanks, listeners.
Thanks for listening to this episode of News Club. We've got 2 more interviews before the year is out, one of which is with our Australian of the Year, Richard Scolyer. To make sure you don't miss that and others, hit follow on News Club in your podcast app.